Welcome everyone to the second portion of our celebration of Prince's The Truth in support of the PRN Alumni Foundation. I am really excited and honored to moderate this panel of presenters who I have seen present on Prince and many other occasions, and they always bring it. And so we're going to start off with Kamilah Cummings, and we're going to post links so you can read their bios. Some of these names are familiar, and I'm just going to let Kamilah welcome us to her and introduce her presentation, and then we'll take it from there.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation. Thank you, Zaire. It's always a pleasure to be on a panel with you. I'm looking forward to the moderated portion later. But right now, I just welcome you guys to watch my presentation on Don't Play Me, Prince's Black Literary Aesthetic.
Hello and welcome to my presentation, Don't Play Me, Prince's Black Literary Aesthetic. I'm Kamilah Cummings and I'm just going to jump on into this. I want to start by saying that I love the Truth album. I think it is such a luscious display of Prince's guitar prowess, but also his lyrical prowess as well. And that's what I want to focus on in this presentation within the context of his use of a Black literary aesthetic in his writing. So Prince is inarguably one of the greatest artists of all time. I think he's the GOAT, and he is often heralded for his diverse musical genius. However, I think one aspect of his genius that is often overlooked or is unsung to me is his craft as a writer. You know, he was a wordsmith, a weaver of words. He really was great at employing multiple literary devices, multiple literary genres. And I have to give credit to my fellow panelist, C.Lee McInnes, for his book, his amazing book, The Lyrics of Prince. I call it the Prince Bible. And what I loved about that book from the first time I bought it in its first run was that it was the first serious study of Prince's lyrics. And I really appreciated that because too often Black songwriters are not given the same level of consideration for their lyrics as their white counterparts. I have this picture of Rolling Stone magazine's 100 greatest songwriters, and over time they've kind of, gotten their DEI on it and added more writers of color. But overall, Black writers are not really regarded for their lyric writing, and it's the usual suspects at the top of the list: Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards. We've got David Bowie and Kurt Cobain. And so songwriting in terms of lyrics, the narrative, the prose, the storytelling has been seen as the domain of white men all too often because of this idea. I think that writing, people see it as an endeavor of intellect and creativity and reflection and critical thought. And often Black people aren't associated with that, unfortunately. So it's easy for the white critical establishment to dismiss Prince. I think he was number 18 on that list. Not that lists matter, but it provides some context for how Black writers are often overlooked or not given the same level of credit as their white counterparts. In the Rolling Stone piece, they said that Prince lyrically tended to stick to one freaky subject, but no songwriter had explored sex as ingeniously as he did. And I thought, wow, Prince's lyrics are about so much more than sex. So I love this quote from C.Lee where he says, one of the most influential and vivid examples of a musical poet, satirist, philosopher, and storyteller is Prince Rogers Nelson, because Prince really was gifted at using devices like anaphora and epistrophe, which we see in the song Don't Play Me, the repetition of words for effect at the beginning of a verse. And then at the end of it as well, he uses metaphor and symbolism, wordplay, just all these hyperbole to Mises, where he's breaking up words and putting words in between. So he was really skilled, a craftsman when it comes to writing, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. So to understand the Black literary aesthetic, we have to understand the Black arts movement. And the Black arts movement was really seen as a sister to the Black Power movement. It was like this additional parallel movement, if you will, that centered Black life and culture in the arts. And so it was this real kind of galvanizing period in the late 60s and 70s where those who understood the power and purpose of the arts to inspire and shape and uplift and empower the Black community focused on community building through the arts. And that's where you saw this growth of arts-centered community centers and projects and initiatives that promoted a sense of a unified purpose in Black people and Black self-love. And this is important for understanding the Black literary aesthetic because it was born out of this. It was about giving Black writers their flowers and really understanding what made Black literature unique and of value. And so it's important when we think about Prince because as we've learned from his involvement at the Way and the Phyllis Wheatley community centers in Minneapolis, is that he was very much influenced by this. He was involved in this. It helped to shape who he was as a young Black man and also as an artist. And so we see the themes that were so prevalent in the Black arts movement in Prince's music increasingly from the 90s forward. And so I had this collage of just some of the artists. There's a picture of the New Way down there, a Compton Community Center that shows the kind of things that were going on at these community centers: dance, photography, music, drama. And it really was about centering Blackness in the greatness, the beauty, the intellect, the creativity, the resilience, the importance of Blackness in the art. So that leads us into the Black literary aesthetic and its origins. And so for this presentation, I'm using the paper Total Life is What We Want, The Progressive Stages of the Black Literary Aesthetic by Reginald Martin. And I'm using it because Martin provides a detailed explanation of the evolution of the Black literary aesthetic. And in this examination, he gives us characteristics that really kind of define this literary device, this literary aesthetic, if you will. And one of the things that I thought was so poignant is that he puts forth what other critics agree with, that slave narrative started the literary tradition in the United States for Black writers. And I thought of the irony of this is during Prince's period of rebellion. You know, this is where he has connected himself to the ongoing exploitation of Black labor for the profit of white institutions and white people, and he wants to be liberated from that. So when we think about these slave narratives, as they say, as nonfiction narratives that transformed into literature by the power of emotive language and the power of the emotive situation, thinking about Prince and his situation at the point where he's writing this song, this period, and the pathos of the position of the narrator. Prince is the narrator in Don't Play Me, and we're in this space, the narrative of the life of Prince Rogers Nelson at this point. So one of these characteristics that Martin points out is that Black literature has this aspect that is so situationally emotive. And going back to what I was just saying about Prince's situation, here he is in this space where he is single-handedly fighting Warner Brothers, specifically, but in a larger sense, he's fighting the entire racist structure of the music industry. And really, it's indicative of a fight against the larger society and its own institutionalized or structured racism. And so this is Prince's situation right here. And so when we think about this definition of this emotive language being coupled with the situationally emotive, and how the situationally emotive has been essential to the development of the Black literary aesthetic, because the socially pathetic is an inseparable part of the Black social experience. This is important because when Black people are constantly confronted with the pathology of racism, it informs the art. You know, if you are dialed into going again, the Black arts movement, understanding Black life. So here Prince is in this situation where he's fighting racist structures. He's fighting things that are socially pathetic. So he says, don't play me. I use proper English and I'm straight. So I'm going to talk about Black English in a moment on the next slide, but he's letting you know, I might use African American vernacular, or Ebonics as it was called at the time, but that doesn't mean I don't understand proper English. I'm multilinguistic. I'm straight. So still combating this idea that he's gay because he didn't, conform to these heteronormative ideas of how masculinity should be portrayed. And so there's that. I'm in the news again for paying dues, my friend. So he's being ridiculed and lambasted for having the audacity to one off of the plantation of Warner Brothers in the music industry. So there's a lot going on right now in terms of Prince's situation, and he's writing through it in this particular song, and others of this period as well. I wanted to point out this quote from Guitar World really quickly because, again, in terms of the Black literary aesthetic, it's so poignant. That's my word for today. But I love how he says, you have to have a certain empathy in order to understand the situation. Like when people made fun of my name change, it was mostly white people because Black people empathize with wanting to change the situation. Again, the situationally emotive. So I talked about Black English or African American vernacular. Ebonics was the word of the day, and it was being misrepresented in the media as just broken English or a derivative of standard American English that was not without its own history and identity. And so Geneva Smitherman, who was a pioneer in this area, says that Black English, the speakers of it, are not only the users of it, but also they share an Afro-American socio-linguistic construction of reality, the one that gave rise to this language. I think it's important that we see Prince always, and he's done this throughout his career, use the African-American vernacular. There's the scene in Under the Cherry Moon that I have always loved because it's so clever in acknowledging the value of African American vernacular language. So he's showing Mary, hey, you've got your thing and I might not know it, but I got something that you don't know either, and it's not of any less value. And so when we think about some of the things that characterize African American vernacular, they're signifying. And this song, as C. Lee points out in his book, is a double signifier. Prince is saying, don't play me, you can't play me for a fool, but also don't play me on the radio, go ahead, blackball me, I don't care, because I know I'm in the fight for what's right. And so when he says, you couldn't play enough of me now to make me feel like a star, don't play me, I already do on my car. It's what Smitherman talks about in terms of signification, this idea of using irony and humor and exaggeration and indirection as a form of corrective criticism. So he's criticizing the people who think they're hurting him by not playing him because he doesn't need them to play him. So there's meaning there, and I love that he incorporates it into this song. The title itself, is African American Vernacular English. So there's just a lot of that in this song. Blunt language. So blunt language, is another really important aspect of the Black literary aesthetic. And this song is blunt. Don't play me, I'm over 30 and I don't smoke weed. So we're in the chronic era of hip hop, and he's like, I'm not down with that, I'm not doing that. I put my ass away in the music I play and the type of stereo you're trying to feed. So he's aware of the stereotypical messages that are being conveyed through music. He is also letting his audience know that he's no longer getting into the stereotype of the hypersexualized Black male as part of his performance act. So there's this need to be blunt, to make sure that you are understood and clear in your language so that there is no doubt what the meaning is for the listener or the reader, the receiver of your words, and Prince does that in the song. Double consciousness, that's another aspect of the Black literary aesthetic, which Du Bois gave us this wonderful framework for understanding what it is to be Black in America, this two-ness, this seeing yourself as yourself, but then also seeing yourself through the eyes of others, the Black gaze and the white gaze, and also understanding that your difference is not indicative of inferiority. And I picked this quote from the song because I love this. Don't play me, I'm the wrong color and I play guitar. Prince knows that the white critical establishment in the music industry has always seen the guitar as the domain of the white male, the white rocker, in the larger society as well. So Prince's prowess as a guitarist, which I said is on full display on this album, is rarely seen, or it was rarely seen or given its due until the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame performance, where that laid into his career. All these people suddenly had an epiphany that Prince could play guitar. I saw a clip where Billy Gibbons said, well, until the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I knew he held a guitar, but then I saw how talented he was when he was up there, you know, playing a George Harrison song. Joe Perry from Aerosmith said something similar about how he never thought of Prince as a fellow guitarist until 1994 when he saw him play a solo at MTV Europe. So again, there's this idea of not wanting to acknowledge the greatness of Black guitarists, and Prince does that even in the guitarists he's hired. Miko Weaver, Levi Caesar, Cat Dyson, and Mike Scott are on the Truth album. So I love that. And really quickly, I wanted to just give some brothers their flowers, because Prince has acknowledged so many of these great guitarists. I don't have time to name them all, but I do have to shout out Carlos Santana, because he has routinely talked about Santana as an influence, the cadre of Parliament Funkadelic guitarists, Johnny Guitar Watson, Tony Maiden, Leroy Sugarfoot Bonner. There's just so many. Prince and Daz, I want to just point out that by his second album, Why You Gonna Treat Me So Bad, was number 13 on the Black charts. Black folks knew Prince was a guitar guy long before 2004, or when Rolling Stone left him off the list of 100 greatest guitarists that year. So social criticism and activism, this is another aspect of the Black literary aesthetic. And we know by the 90s, Prince was very socially critical and became very much an activist around the Black situation. He was always pushing societal norms, but in the 90s and forward through the rest of his career, he very much situates it in a response to what is happening in and to the Black community. So I love where he says, don't blame me, don't be mad at me, the current puller in the game. Maybe how you call us, I guess I better say N-words, ain't the same. But here he is saying, you know, I am continuing the legacy of Black folks who came before me, who fought unjust systems, who stood up for what was right, who critiqued what was wrong. And so he's taking the backlash. He's like, I don't care. I'm going to be the current puller, because we're not all the same. You're not going to keep exploiting us, and we're not all going to go along just to get along. Don't play me. So I love that. Bringing it to a close, I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on, I don't have time to really get into this, but he makes this reference to the mountaintop twice in this song, which I found interesting, especially because this characteristic of this kind of folk sermon structure. This song sometimes feels like a speech or a sermon. And I thought about Martin Luther King's last speech the night before he was assassinated, where he talks about the mountaintop. It's called I've Been to the Mountaintop, but how there are parallels and differences in the way Prince and Dr. King use this. Prince's symbolism, or this metaphor of the mountaintop, is kind of the pinnacle of fame and success. He's been there. It's not always cracked up to be. He's over that. He's in a fight that's so much bigger than him now. And then Dr. King in this space where they're both labor issues. Dr. King is there with those sanitation workers fighting against exploited labor and unjust labor practices. Prince is doing the same with the record industry at this time. And the fight, again, is so much bigger than him. And he knows that. He's very much aware of that, just like Dr. King. So I found it interesting. They're both like the same age when they write these words. And I would just be curious if there was an influence of Dr. King's speech on Prince when he was writing this. So to bring this to a close, these last two characteristics, art as an important factor in the social progress of the community, the Black community, obviously, and then Blackness transfigured into an all-encompassing metaphysical concept. So I thought this was great because when we look at the song on an album called The Truth, this is Prince's truth. And from this point in his career forward, we see him, eschew the racial ambiguity he exploited to gain mainstream success in the 1980s. And in the 90s, he's overtly affirming himself as a member of the Black community. That is his identity. He's a Black man who uses his art to uplift and inspire, particularly the Black community. He talks about that a lot in the Beautiful Ones memoir. And he knows at this point in his career, he can't make art just for personal gain. It's beyond him now. And so I loved where he says, you start to realize that you're part of a bigger picture and the things you do have serious consequences. It got to the point a few years ago in my life where I really had to ask myself, who am I and what was my music for? And we see from this song and his use of the Black literary aesthetic that he is a Black man who is using his music to galvanize, uplift, empower, and inspire his people. And as he said in this final quote, the people who are supposed to understand do understand. And that's his truth. Don't play him. Thank you very much for attending my presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Kamilah. You have given us a lot to think on and meditate